My class was reading Animal Farm, a scathing allegory about George Orwell, or at least I was. I had a sneaking suspicion that they were reading a silly story about an evil pig named Napoleon, who ruined a wonderful display of perfect equality. How could I bring home the fact that the theory of animalism, which instigates the tragic events of our novel, was mirrored by a real-life movement called communism? I told them it was very big for a few decades last century. It was as if I was talking about disco. How could I show them why Orwell was not alone in noticing the results of all this grand idealism were inevitable? After much deliberation, I did what any reasonable teacher would do. I orchestrated a coup against myself. I told the class they had successfully rebelled against my rule. After the celebration, I broke it to them that there were 5 small things they needed to do with their newfound freedom in order to prosper, which is to say, not get a detention. They needed to 1. Rename the class. After all, 10C bore the mark of the oppressor. 2. Create a motto or rallying song. 3. Write at least 4 commandments to keep the class on the right path. 4. Make a plan to keep the time productive as a literary study. And 5. Function autonomously as a literature discussion. I innocently suggested that the class might need a leader, or leaders. I told them to think of their looming detentions not as a remnant of my reign, but as a representation of the starvation and unrest which would befall their revolution without effective cooperation. That one was a bit of a stretch. In hindsight, I was fortunate that I had such a cordial class on which to experiment. I am aware how wrong it could have gone. Before ceding power to your class, do make sure that they understand the implied boundaries. This speaks to class management. Beyond these concerns about opportunistic rule-breaking, it took resolve to remain aloof from proceedings. On a few occasions, I had to assure students that I was indeed part of the scenery, rather than a teacher. As it turned out, though, the exercise worked better than I could possibly have hoped. Firstly, it told me about the students. This was quite early on in the term, and I wanted to learn a bit about my students. I wondered who would be unable or unwilling to work in a group, unable to defer, or unwilling to command. Many of the students were dutiful and courteous in their interactions with me, the teacher. It was a strict school in that regard. This activity showed me how they interacted with their peers. Nothing I construed as bullying, which would have forced me to suspend the exercise, but certainly terse and disrespectful in some cases. If I was going to foster a collaborative classroom, this sort of behaviour would need to be checked. Secondly, it told the students about the novel. Their actual task, even if it was of peripheral importance, was to make a class song, motto, and commandments. This reinforced recent learning. While they were busy, though, going it alone, I wasn't filing my nails in the corner. I had a fascinating vantage and a sound knowledge of the text. I was feverishly jotting down behaviour and sentiments which I felt had their parallels in the novel. I saw students decide that they weren't going to be heard and therefore may as well opt out. They knew they had grown so weary of the bickering and disorganisation that they could only stop participating. These students were going to be helpful in our explanation of the character Benjamin the donkey. I saw students concerned with nothing more than keeping order. They had little interest in what decisions were being made, only that there was a decorum. I saw students who, upon becoming confused or dissatisfied, would hark back to a point of universal support. Finally, I saw 2 clear leaders emerge, first one, and then the other, following an actual leadership challenge. What luck! I'm recounting this lesson because it acted as a centerpiece for the unit. Many of our subsequent activities, including a memorable mock trial, recast students in the roles they unwittingly selected. This continuation served to validate these experiences for the students. After I had invited students to share how well they felt they had fulfilled their obligations, how they could have done better, what difficulties they faced, and who they felt had become the leaders, I shared my own notes, with barely concealed satisfaction. I believe that participating in such a swift stratification brought home the impossibility of true leadership by committee.